The guard on the mail coach sees pedestrians and carriages up ahead on the street. Perched 13 feet above the ground on his swift vehicle, he balances the bumps and jostles of the road, gripping the coach with his left hand. With his right arm, he points his unwieldy coach horn slightly to the right to shield against the headwind and to avoid getting tangled with the driver's whip. Then, with a flourish, he tells the bystanders to move aside, sounding the familiar signal, "Clear the road." The coach horn, similar in function to the circular-shaped post horn, was originally used on English postal vehicles or mail coaches in the late 18th and early 19th century. By the 1840s, English mail coaches were gradually replaced by train routes. However, the vehicles and their signature horns did not disappear. Instead, they were adopted into popular use. By the second half of the 19th century, upper-class circles in England were driving mail coaches and learning the coach horn for recreation and sport. This fashion caught on in France and America, too. During this period, the function of the coach horn remained largely the same. A 19th century guard would be trained to sound 10 traditional road signals, like the one you just heard. He would also tootle fanfares to announce his coach, and if he were musically inclined, he might play a song on the open road. For most, the coach horn was a novel utility. However, in Paris, a circle of enthusiasts became fascinated with the coach horn, and their experimentation with the instrument propelled innovative musical pursuits between 1870 and 1913. During this period, Parisian elites commissioned composers to write coach horn fanfares for their vehicles. Players practiced the instrument with technical rigor, testing the horn's range, agility, and expressive potential. And some went so far as to compose and perform concert-style works for coach horn ensemble. This unprecedented activity has been meticulously documented in the little-known 1893 instruction manual, Méthode de trompe de mail coach, co-authored by Victor Vinet and Alexandre Passavant. Drawing from this treatise, as well as newspaper and journal articles, this paper will piece together the history of Parisian coach horn tradition. This history is significant because it shows that coach horn playing in France developed differently from the parallel tradition in England. It also contributes to dialogues about utility and aesthetics, illustrating the complex relationship between art and function. And most importantly, this tradition has broader ramifications in music history, since many coach horn hobbyists had influence in the music mainstream as composers, as patrons, and as salon hosts. The coach horn's range of impact in Paris ultimately presents new questions about how coach horn activity connects with developments in late 19th century French music. So I'm thrilled that today we have this repertory to be played for you by this amazing group of performers and scholars. So on coach horn, we have Hank Meredith, Richard Fummison, and Richard Thomas. And on cavalry trumpets, who you'll hear later, we have Ralph Dudgeon, Alyssa Kohler, and Robin Pyle. I owe a great thanks to Hank for bringing parts of his 19th century French instrument collection for you to hear today. He brought cavalry trumpets and the Thibautville Lamy that you just heard. He also went out of his way to edit the last piece on the program so that we could actually put it together for today's performance. And also, I would be remiss not to mention Grace Yaglu and Bill Vendetta, who is here today, who loaned their modern coach horns for this performance. These instruments are also authentic in the sense that they have been played in the ring at many international and national horse and carriage events. So, as we proceed, please be sure to refer to the programs circulating for more information about the instruments and the repertory. During the popular renaissance of male coaches, wealthy elites in England, France, and America got involved with all aspects of the hobby. They learned to drive the four-in-hand vehicles themselves, and they were eager to learn how to sound a coach horn. Responding to this demand, a number of coach horn manuals were published in the late 19th century to instruct the amateur player. There was Ye Coach Horn Tutelers, published in New York, The Coach Horn Tutor in London, and one of the most widely circulated English handbooks, The Coach Horn, What to Blow and How to Blow It. Extra points for cheeky title. It was so popular that the publisher released 7 editions. Surprisingly, the first few editions did not even include the musical notation of road calls, suggesting that these melodies were either very familiar or they were passed along orally. By the 3rd edition, it occurred to them to print the music. The appendix not only contained the signals, but it included other melodies, like the post-horn call, a reference to the main theme from Hermann Koenig's 1844 post-horn gallop. It also contained the Old English air, By a Broom, known to Germans and Austrians as Ach du lieber Augustin, and commonly known today as Did You Ever See a Lassie?
Different key.
These musical examples offer a glimpse of the tunes that guards might have played for entertainment during the journey. However, the author of this English manual placed little faith in the musical literacy and transposing skills of his students. As you can see in this short excerpt, he scored the music in the key of C, and for good measure, also in E-flat. Then the author recommended that the horn players get their sisters, or their cousins, or their aunts, or someone even dearer, to strum the notes on the piano, thereby enabling them to pick up the calls by ear. Evidently, even the ladies in the parlor got involved with this hobby. But most importantly, this passage reinforces the idea that coach horn playing was easily transmitted without formal training in music. The casual approach taken in this manual sharply contrasts the instruction found in Méthode de trompe de male coach. In the French handbook, co-authors Vinet and Passavant outlined a detailed pedagogical study that not only demands musical literacy, but also requires advanced musicianship and instrumental skill. The method book begins by offering a musical foundation in notation, expressive markings, and it even explains conducting patterns before it moves into an extensive series of exercises. Some of these drills practice accuracy on ascending and descending intervals. This one here rehearses ascending sixth at increasingly faster rhythmic subdivisions. Other exercises demanded nimble breath, such as this rhythmic drill for dotted eighth notes. The first measure spells out the technique demanded for the passage. The player is supposed to add 16th note rests throughout to ensure that the dotted rhythm is crisp and precise. I bring this up not because it is a new idea, but because it's the type of meticulous instruction one would expect to receive in a conservatory setting. This pedantic approach is found throughout the manual, as the authors ultimately codify and frame the coach horn as a serious musical instrument. The treatise culminates with a collection of concert-style works that ultimately reimagine the instrument. No longer playing lone tunes on a male coach, the coach horn players join as a sociable ensemble in three-part fantasies, polkas, mazurkas, and morceaux concertants. Thank you. These pieces feature interactive dialogue between parts, nimble octave leaps, challenging ranges, expression, and dynamics. So, without further ado, here are two of the ensembles, the Garden Polka, followed by the mazurka, Dans la clairière, meaning in the clearing. The titles of these pieces, Garden Party and In the Clearing, are noteworthy because they give us a clue about where these ensembles might have been heard. Outdoor horn music has been traditionally associated with hunts, processions, and band concerts, but the coach horn tradition was opening up different context for horn music. Not only does this mean that people heard more horns in more places, but it also means that new musical practices were being invented. So let's turn to these now. One setting to hear coach horns was on the public mail coach lines. The public mail coaches in Paris functioned somewhat like the modern tour bus does today. They offered their passengers day excursions to enticing destinations. Since the round trip only cost 15 francs, it was accessible to the middle class, and suddenly mail coaches had much more popular exposure. Parisians could choose from a variety of lines: the Crescent, the Magnet, the Rocket, or Old Times. Here is an ad for two lines that were popular in the early 1890s: the Comet and the Rainbow. Both of these departed near the Paris Opéra. The Comet traveled north to the Maison Lafitte, where there was a horse race track, and the Rainbow went to the National Antiquities Museum in Saint-Germain-en-Laye, a western suburb of the city. During these day trips, it's safe to say that the passengers heard a fair amount of coach horn music, particularly because the guard on the Rainbow was none other than Alexandre Passavant, the co-author of Méthode de Trompe de Mail Coach. And on top of that, the Rainbow was owned and driven by Count Henri de Yanville, who wrote the preface to the same treatise. Yanville considered music to be the most outstanding feature on the Rainbow trips. And he wrote to Passavant, "I have treasured the best memories of our route to Saint-Germain-en-Laye, when your virtuosity caused me to be so happy. And I wish, my dear Alexandre, if I ever have a public coach again, I would never have another guard but you." With at least 2 coach horn players on board, ensemble playing was entirely possible on their day trips. One coach horn trio from Méthode de Trompe de Mail Coach is a galop entitled The Rainbow, commemorating this public line. As you listen to it, you might imagine Passavant and Yanville playing it during their trips to the Antiquities Museum. Besides the public lines, Paris had a sizable community of private mail coach owners. There were enough to warrant 2 four-in-hand societies in the city: Le Réunion Road Coaching Club and the more enduring group Les Guides. These societies would organize group trips to the racetrack, picnic outings, and drives to parties in country homes. Since each mail coach carried a horn-wielding guard, these group events were perfect opportunities for such ensemble music. The most outstanding annual event for the private coach owners was the Journée des Dragues, the Day of the Drags. It was one of those festivities surrounding the Grand Prix horse race. And on this day, a group of more than 50 four-in-hand coaches would parade from Paris 2 hours to the track at Auteuil, where they would be greeted by spectators and the military band of the 56th Regiment. Here, you can see part of the 1899 procession. The coaches are carrying the who's who of society. Their arrival at the racetrack might be compared to the red carpet displays at the Oscars. The elevated seats on the vehicles showcased the socialites wearing the latest fashions. And the colorful male coaches with their fanfares were just as much of an attraction. The Méthode de Trompe de Male Coach contains 29 fanfare trios for different private coaches. These arrangements are paired with physical descriptions of each of these coaches. For instance, from this example, we know that Michel Efrusy drove a Peters & Sons coach, and it was blue and red and decorated with a sheaf of grain. I don't think this caption is superfluous. My theory is that a trio of coach horn players were stationed at the racetrack, and they used these descriptions to identify the coaches from a distance so that they could announce the arrival of each coach with three-part fanfares. So, if you don't mind helping out, if Michel Efrusy were approaching, we would hear this. Admittedly, his salute is fairly unimaginative, but some coach owners went so far as to commission composers to write more flamboyant male coach fanfares. These commissions indicate that the coaching community wanted a fanfare that was not just a signal, but something original, well-crafted, something that could be considered music. So here is an inventive fanfare by salon composer Mauss that was commissioned by the Comte de Madre. This fanfare commission encapsulates how seemingly disparate realms, four and hand coaching and music salons actually shared the same patrons and audiences. Recognizing this parallel, one journalist wrote in 1912, "The open-air male coaches and the salons have so far competed with elegance and success." And indeed, many of the coaching hobbyists referenced in Vinet and Passavant's treatise were also active in the salon circuit. For instance, Michel Efrusy, whose fanfare you just heard, wrote and published salon music for piano and violin. Coaching enthusiast Count Potocki was married to prominent salon hostess Emanuela Potocka, whose gatherings included Forêt, Anne, and Widor. The president of the coaching society, Les Guides, was married to Countess Elisabeth Grefful. Not only did she host Saint-Saëns, Forêt, Sauzet at her salon, but she is famously remembered for her key role in bringing the Ballet Russe to Paris. Now, I doubt that these Parisian socialites would have welcomed coach horns in their salons. However, the coach horn hobbyists would have been steeped in the mindset of the salon, and they probably thought about their craft within this framework. From this perspective, their musical rigor makes sense, since there was a high bar for musical amateurism in the Parisian salons. Also, they might have seen coach horns as a musical resource that could be tapped, just in the same way that salon hosts would often organize entertainment with whatever performers and instruments they had on hand. In addition, the coach horn repertory epitomizes the inventive and experimental spirit that was valued and applauded in the salon. Conversely, one might consider how the coach horn activity affected mainstream musical thought. Prior to this period, the coach horn and the post horn had really been featured in just a small number of musical works, such as Mozart's Post Horn Serenade and Königsgalopp. In pieces like these, the horn is treated like a novelty instrument whose idiomatic material contrasts with the orchestral style. However, the repertoire you heard today does not compartmentalize the coach horn as a utility. Instead, it's treated as an instrument in its own right. Moreover, this repertoire explores the range of sounds the coach horn could contribute to a composition. And this approach aligns with mainstream developments in French music, since composers were increasingly choosing to use instruments for their timbral qualities rather than their traditional roles in the orchestra. The coach horn circle certainly seemed to share this out-of-the-box and inventive perspective on instrumentation. And so we're going to conclude with a piece that encapsulates this innovative spirit. It was probably written for the Journée de Drague, and it resourcefully joins the military band trumpeters of the 56th Regiment with the coach horn players. This array of brass would have met on the racetrack in Auteuil. The sextet Bellone that you'll hear is scored for cavalry trumpets in E-flat and coach horns in B-flat. This unique combination of keyed instruments enriches the harmony and allows for a modulation to the minor mode in the trio section. So, without further ado, we conclude with Bellone.
So we have time for just one or two questions, comments? Yes.
Just wondering if your opinion from researchers extended as far as really the colonial countries like Australia and
It hasn't. I really picked up on this. My focus has been on 19th century French music and a lot of the sort of street activity and horn signals and street performers even that were working in Paris. And that's how I came across the study of the coach horns. My research, I've done research at the Carriage Association of America, so I've gotten a taste of the American tradition and, of course, the root tradition from England. But that's a really good point. I'd be curious to see how this played out in Australia, too. Thank you.
Keith.
Any notion why that the advertisement for the rainbow was in English, the French term?
Right. So since a lot of these practices were derived from England, because the recreational use of male coaches really began in England around the 1860s, and it traveled to France by the 1870s. So they're sort of coming into this 10 years later. And so a lot of their societies and discussions about male coaches insert in these English words. I think it might have seemed fashionable. They had things like, even the title title of the treatise is Méthode de trompe de male coach, right? An English word right in there. I think that's why rainbow might have been an English word.
I'm afraid we're going to have to proceed to our next section with the natural horns. But again, Nicole, thank you very much.